everyone, and welcome back to our new Breakpoint series. My name is Michelle Sandford, and I'm the Developer Engagement Lead at Microsoft in Asia. I'm super excited to be the host of Season 4. For those of you tuning in for the first time, New Breakpoint is for developers by developers, and we discuss a range of topics with an incredible lineup of guests. The show will be broadcast on the second Thursday of every month, and each hour-long episode will include Q&A, and the guest and I will both be online and answering questions throughout the episode. If you miss the broadcast, do not worry. As long as you register, you can watch the show afterwards. You just won't be able to ask any more questions. Why tune in, you ask? Not only will we dive deep into the latest developer technology industry updates and help you upskill yourself personally and professionally, but we want you to be part of our developer community and to stay in the know of what's new and interesting for us. Today, I am really excited to introduce my guest, Sara Bergman. Welcome, Sara.
Thank you so much for having me, Michelle. Great to be here. Well, it's great to have you here because we're actually in my home turf.
Yes, indeed. It's always a lovely, lovely, lovely place to be. So we're in Norway recording this episode. And this is the third time I think I have been to Oslo. No, wait, sorry. This is the third time I've been to NDC Oslo, but I have actually been to Oslo more times than that.
Oh, then you're a veteran.
Well, I love it.
It's a great place. It's a great place to visit and a great place to live.
Wonderful. Maybe you can start by telling us a little bit about you, about your career, where you have come from.
Absolutely, yeah. So I'm based here in Oslo, Norway. I'm Swedish. It matters a lot to us Scandinavians. Anyone living south of Denmark, I typically say do not care. But for us Scandinavians, it matters a lot. I'm a senior software engineer at Microsoft. I work with Microsoft 365 products, specifically in the people space. So if you see your name, title, contact information of people, that sort of thing, it's what I do. And then I also have a big interest and a passion for green software. So I've been working with that internally and externally through the Green Software Foundation now for a few years, actually, which is quite exciting. And it's something I write about and speak about externally as well.
It's a huge topic at the moment. I've just come back. I've come from Australia to here, and I was talking to a bunch of my engineers before I came, and they that was one of the key things in their mind. They said, we need to know as engineers more about green software. Does anyone know anyone who knows anything about that? And I was like, oh, I do know someone, as it happens. Well, maybe you can explain to the listeners what green software is and what we mean by that.
Yes, certainly. It's not a new concept as a whole, but it's like really gaining traction now the last few years. But typically, and there may be a few definitions out there, but I'm going to use the Green Software Foundation's definition because that's the one I think resonates the most, makes the most sense. And they have this overall concept of carbon efficiency. So doing the most amount with the least amount of carbon. So doing more with less. And that sort of boils down to three different sub areas. So the first is energy efficiency, using the least amount of energy possible. And that's probably that's the first that comes to mind, likely for most people. Okay, how am I more efficient with my energy usage? So that one we're probably still pretty good to think about in terms like performance or it's a metric we feel a bit more comfortable with. The other one is hardware efficiency. So using the least amount of embodied carbon possible, because like creating hardware is incredibly energy intensive. It takes a lot of metals and materials to construct and ship those around. And we pay down that debt over the usage and lifetime of that hardware. And as software people, we kind of think less about this. So it's like, that's the hardware people's problem. I don't have to worry. But in fact, the type of software that you write impacts the type of hardware that you need and that your clients need. So we're not really off the hook there. And the last part is carbon awareness. So grids around the world, they have different sources of energy generation. Some vary over time, some vary from location to location. Here in Norway, we have a lot of hydro. There's a lot of mountains and a lot of rain. So we have a lot of hydro. I'm not sure what you have in Australia. Maybe a more varied mix.
We are a country that is built on fossil fuels.
Right.
Many of our big enterprise organizations are mining companies, resources companies. And although they might diversify a bit into clean energy sources, the basis that we are coming from is digging stuff out of the ground.
Right. Yeah. Big countries. So yeah, there are always like some geographical reasons, I think, for why countries have certain energy mixes. But carbon awareness is about utilizing this fluctuality, because few countries actually have the same all the time. And even so, your neighboring country might have something else. So doing more when the grid is clean and doing less when the grid is dirty is the concept of carbon awareness.
I do have, I have all solar panels on the top of my house, and I think most Australians do because it's always sunny in Australia.
Exactly.
So we have that for sure. But I noticed you had like a chart up yesterday of the world and how how well they are doing carbon wise. And I was kind of surprised by how dark, which is bad, Australia was, because we have so few people living there. But for sure, it's because of that.
Yeah. And that graph is from our World in Data. So that's like for the whole year, but it's per kilowatt hour. So even though you're few people, it's not per capita, but kilowatt hour. So it is interesting. The energy market is fascinating.
So I guess as, software engineers, as developers, what we think about is our code. And when we're thinking about what can we do to have greener software, I guess the first thing developers think about is, should I be rewriting all of my code in Rust?
Yes, exactly. It's for a very long time, that was always the first question I got whenever speaking about this. So I now made it a slide in in all my presentations to sort of intersect there. I think we should always do the efficiency improvements that make sense to your business case. Always do those. Always do the small things. Always be as performant as makes sense to you. For some that have like high performance scenarios where it's like mission critical, you are looking at the milliseconds, then of course do all the big things. But that type of code that is highly efficient is hard to maintain. It takes a long time to write, and it can increase the cost of adding new features. So that means developer productivity goes down. And for a lot of us, so for a lot of our organizations, developer time, developer cost is actually the biggest budget post. So if you're going to spend a whole long time rewriting your entire code base, and then you have to ramp everyone up on this code base, that's essentially time you're not delivering business value. And the world we live in is that most organizations don't have the economic means to sustain that. Also, even though there might be big wins from this, it's a ginormous effort. And there are many things that you can do before that will have maybe just as big or bigger or smaller, depends, but that will get significant return for your investment. So those are the things you should be looking at first. Like, what are the easy things that I can do to get big results? And rewriting your entire code base is not a small thing. It's a ginormous thing.
Yeah. And learning a new language and all of that.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. You might not have any Rust colleagues at all in your division. And then, how does your retention and hiring policies affect from that decision? So, yeah.
But if they're thinking of getting into coding languages, that is one they should put on their to-do list, right?
Yes, it is a highly efficient coding language for sure. So, go for it. And always, like, if you're interested to learn a new language, I say go for it. Like you said on your t-shirt, coding is life. So,
and where is the best place to start if you want to go more green as an organization?
Yeah, my argument is to look at operational efficiency. Look at your architecture. Look at how you are operating and maintaining your code base. How is your utilization rates doing? How are you deploying and running code? And what are the levers that you can pull there? Because here, first of all, it's entirely within your control. You don't have to wait for like someone to put solar panels on your roof, for example, or you don't have to wait for hardware to become magically more efficient. You can start right now. And relatively small things here can actually have pretty big return on investments.
So I know all of the big cloud organizations have those well-architected frameworks.
Yes.
Do those all speak to what you can do to be more green?
Yes, that's a great example. Yeah, but a few years ago, I think those well-architected frameworks, they have existed for all major cloud providers for some time. But just in the last few years, they've all added a sustainability section, which I think is such a great step. We know Microsoft, for example, announced in 2020 all of the missions that we're working toward, and other cloud providers are doing the same. But a part of that are these sections, and they are all well worth reading, I would say. They're well formulated, have a lot of different bits and pieces. For the Azure one, it's split up in different categories. So they do have some coding practices actually as well there, and they also have things about how you should think about your data, what you should do about your application platform. They also have a bit about measuring your impact, and yeah, all around good stuff.
Do you remember any of the top tips that you can just share now?
Yeah, sure. So I think one of the key things that I at least like to talk about a lot is avoid hoarding. I say don't be Smaug. Now, Smaug is the dragon in The Hobbit, in case you've read it or seen it on screen, that lives in a mountain, sits on top of a giant treasure pile. He doesn't share the treasure pile. Also, he doesn't do anything with the treasure pile. And sometimes we can be Smaug and keep resources on for a long time beyond when we actually need them or use them, because it's maybe hard to identify where they are, or because we're lazy, or because they don't cost that much to just turn it off. But just removing your idle resources can actually, save significantly in cost. But of course, it's also greener because you're then freeing up those resources to be used for something else, which is a good thing.
I absolutely would say that
You're a Smaug.
Yeah, I like to collect things and keep them, but also I would really like my space to be completely clean.
Yeah.
But with cloud, indeed, it has forced me to be more conscientious of that, not from a green perspective, just from a cost perspective.
Exactly, yes.
And so the encouragement when I speak to students and things all the time is, do not leave your VMs running. Do not leave do not build things and leave them up there all the time. And even though as a student, if you build stuff, you might be really proud of the thing you have built. Yeah. In fact, the better thing to do is record yourself building it and keep that recording on the YouTube or whatever. But then delete all your resources at the end of that project, so you're not keeping things going. And even with code spaces on GitHub, which I love because it will turn itself off automatically. I try to make a good practice of stopping those when I have finished using it. Because you got 60 hours free per month. And I would like to be able to use the whole free.
Yeah, and those kind of retention policies can be a good way. I know in Azure there's something called Microsoft Purview, which you can actually use to set retention policies, and then it will do time-based purging of your data that you configure. It doesn't purge data you want to keep, of course. But yeah, I think it's a good idea, and that's something where platforms can help, because if you have an on-prem data center and you have to request a physical server and it's a long process, you're also more likely to keep it on even if you don't need it, because you maybe worked hard and it took a long time for you to get that server, and now you have it, you want to hold on to it. Whereas if it's easy to get what you want, and it's also easy to release when you don't need it, because you need, if you want to start a new project, you don't have to reuse your old VM. You can just get a new one. It's easy.
Actually, yeah, I remember when we first had the cloud, and, there was a big encouragement for people to move to cloud, and they said it will be cheaper. And of course, it's not cheaper if you lift and shift everything as it is and move it to cloud and leave it all running there. But now we are much more mature as organizations. That's not what we're doing. We have things like containers, we have serverless, we have Azure Functions, dev boxes and code spaces. And so, maybe you could talk a bit about why it is a more sustainable and green thing to put stuff in cloud than to have our own on-premises.
Absolutely. Yeah, and because it's like you said, the cloud is not magic. I think especially when the cloud as like a concept emerged, and people were like, "Oh, it's this fluffy magic thing in the sky," but it in reality it's just servers in someone else's data center, with the addition of this cool layer of business logic. And when you lift and shift, like you say, you get sort of no benefits. But if you use things like managed services, serverless, what happens is that you give away a little bit of your control to your cloud provider. And what they can do is to pack like non-physical resources onto the physical resources in a smarter way. And what that does is two things. You increase machine utilization. And that's smart. It may sound bad. Oh, why would I want high machine utilization? And it's not necessarily about like super high machine utilization. It's more about avoiding low machine utilizations. And that's for two primary reasons. The first is, and this is something you might never consider unless you like switch the server on in your life. But when you do, and it's just sitting idle, it consumes a baseline of energy, even if it's like doing nothing. And of course, that is a significant investment. So we want to be mindful of how that is used. Now, if you have 20 servers that are around like 2% utilization, you have to pay that startup cost on every single machine. If you instead have just the one server that's 20% utilized, so you aggregated all of those things into one single thing, you only have the one startup cost. Because as you increase the utilization of a machine, of course, energy utilization goes up. But it doesn't actually go up so dramatically as you might think. And it absolutely doesn't start from zero is the key takeaway. So that's the first part. Higher utilized servers are better at turning energy into useful compute. Secondly, you're using less hardware because if you can pack software containers smarter on a physical disk or physical hardware, you have to use less. And again, hardware is very expensive to create. So what you're doing then is you're freeing up other servers to be used for other things. So those are the key things why things like serverless or managed instances work. Now it's not again magic, and you have to apply your engineering thinking as well when that makes sense. Say you want to do like Kubernetes and you have like full-blown cluster scheduler, which is doing everything super smartly. But the thing you're doing in your cluster, in your containers, is not so resource intensive. It's quite, you maybe just have a few. Then yeah, the overhead of that framework is going to be a lot. It's the same. People always ask, oh, should I just have lots and lots of microservices? And it's like, yeah, if that makes sense for your scenario, but if you just have microservices for the sake of having microservices, that's a lot of orchestration that happens that can actually outweigh the benefits you got. So does that make sense?
Well, the other thing I was thinking about was, I think when you have new hardware, when you have a new phone or you have a new laptop, the hardware is generally more efficient and cleaner. But when I was reading your book, it's talking about how actually a lot of the carbon costs come before you even open your brand new piece of equipment.
Exactly. Yeah. Because this is especially true on the consumer side. So for things like smartphones, laptops, that kind of thing, actually the majority of the emissions are in the manufacturing phase. So a lot of spend because there's a lot of precious metals in our devices. They have to be dug up from the ground, shipped somewhere, and then assembled. And I'm not sure if you ever seen how a CPU is made. It was mind-blowing the first time I saw it. And it's like incredibly high energy intensive procedure because now our chips are so tiny. The silicon is so like you're placing things with such incredible precision, and that takes a lot of energy. So therefore, we're spending a lot of energy in the manufacturing cost. And that we have to be mindful of. Going forward, we also have to be mindful when it comes to recycling that equipment, because we see there was a UN Waste Monitor report released just a few weeks ago, actually, that showed that the amount of precious metals contained in e-waste in some cases can meet the clean tech demand. So if we as like a global community was better at recycling, we would have to mine less.
Well, obviously the whole world thinks about getting electric cars and things now. In Norway, there's a a lot of electric cars. I'm very aware that the production of the electric car, the disposal of it afterwards, it means you need to hold that electric car for quite a long time in order to offset what was the before and what was the after. And I think people don't think about those things at all.
Yeah, it is that life cycle thinking that we're not perhaps used in other industries. That's very second nature to them in the like architecture industry and or the manufacturing industry. They are used to thinking about the life cycle perspective. As software people, we are not so used to thinking. Well, we think about the life cycle, but not in terms of sustainability, but maybe how will my code age and develop over time.
You want to talk a little bit more about carbon awareness and how we can get into that?
Yeah, absolutely. Carbon awareness, I think at least when I first heard about it, it sounded a bit sci-fi. I hadn't so much contemplated like how the electricity grid works. You know, we flick the light switch on and the electricity is just there. And of course, I knew when I, moved away from home and I had to sign my first like electricity, what's it called? Like deal. I could choose from different providers, like what were there, did they have clean energy or not? And then I moved to Norway and here everything is hydro. So I kept researching. I'm like, how are they getting their energy? And then I realized, everyone is using hydro. Okay, so there's no market benefits here in terms of greenness. Everything is kind of green. But that's not the true worldwide, really. Then different energy providers have different methods of generating said energy. I'm sorry, I'm diverging. But how does that relate to software then? Well, firstly, we can make use of this with carbon awareness. So here we're talking about demand shaping and demand shifting. Demand shifting is when you move a workload either in time or space, which again sounds a bit sci-fi, but it's not so hard. There are actually APIs available right now that can give you a forecast of like how will the grid intensity look like for me the next like 24 hours. And you can make use of that to move your workload in time. This doesn't work for everything, but it works for things that are not on demand. For example, Windows 11 are doing it for update installs, or Xbox is doing it for game downloads, where they say, we want to download and update this new game during, I think before they had like service windows, which was more a set time of day, sort of like that. But now they're like a more flexible time range and they will download it when the grid is greener. So you will still get your game down uploads in like a reasonable time. It will just be a bit greener.
I like that better. I like that a lot better than, in fact, it asking me when I go into the game, do you want to download it now?
Yes.
I would like it to just download it whenever is the best time to download it.
Exactly. I hate when I'm playing a game, they're like, it's update available. Do you want to install it? I'm like, no, I want to play the game. That's why I open it. But yeah, of course, then maybe the update has something fun that I also want. Then you have to think, how long do I have? I have a small baby at home, so time alone is very precious. But yeah, so that's demand or time shifting. But there's also location shifting, so you can move your workload in space. And many that doesn't necessarily mean moving your data outside of the country. Many countries have different energy zones or electricity zones that can be greener or not so green, but based on just the physical nature of the electricity grid. So in Azure, for example, there are different zones, right? They can be within the same country or they can be a different country. So of course, never move your workload where you don't have like legal rights to move it. But you can talk to your cloud provider and see what's the greenest region that makes sense for me, for my business use case. And we have the emissions impact dashboard where you can actually see for your specific workloads, okay, but what are the better choices that I can make? And there are also some open source, non-vendor locked in options like electricity map, Wattime API, or a cloud carbon footprint that you can use to determine what will be the best for your business case, really. I think that's also pretty cool. But yeah, don't move stuff like across the Pacific Ocean if you have a lot of network traffic, because then your network emissions are going to eat any potential gain you had from moving there.
Well, I've got a couple of workshops that I got from the Azure Advocates, which are OpenAI things, teaching people prompt engineering and RAG. And when I was setting up those workshops to allow people access to it, they said to me, make sure you put those resources in Sweden Central because it will be right near where you are going to.
Yes.
You don't want to put it in Australia like you normally would because then you'll be reaching across the world.
Exactly.
And I suppose they were thinking about latency, but it's kind of the same thing, actually. The latency and, what is good for the environment is keep it close to where you need it so that you don't have that excess reaching across the world.
Exactly. And that's the thing about green software. A lot of those things, when you go into it, it's like, oh, it's not so new. And actually, it has a lot of knock-on benefits, a lot of scenarios where, like we talked on serverless and on the cloud, a lot of the time it's cheaper. And if you introduce things like auto-scaling, so where you scale your service up and down, you don't have like compute resources to maximize your peak. Well, not only are you saving resources and being greener, it's actually a great way to provide resilience as well. So it all kind of interconnects. Green software isn't a sole ivory tower. It's not this one thing in addition, or that we should only build green software and only focus on that. No, we still have business. We still need to think about all those other things, and green software sort of ties in to those things.
And at the beginning of the carbon awareness, doing things in a greener way was more expensive.
Yeah.
Whereas now, in that example, in fact, it is the most logical thing to do, the cheapest thing to do.
Yeah.
And yet it is still green.
Exactly.
So the world is improving a little bit. I think you talked a bit about that as well in your talk.
Yeah, exactly. And that's something that will become like things where you utilize time of higher renewables or higher levels of renewables or low carbon sources on the grid. They will be cheaper. At least here in Europe, we had an energy crisis back, now it's 2 years ago, where suddenly energy was a lot more expensive for everyone. And everyone started like hyper-focusing on the cost of the electricity. But in truth, costs have always varied for many factors, like supply always have to be met by demand. There cannot be a surplus of electricity in the grid, then expensive things break. So they dump it on the ground. So that's when you as a consumer, you can get actually paid to consume that energy instead, or it will be free. And we're starting to see that all around the world, and that's thanks to renewables. We're putting so much more renewables on the grid in this very rapid rate that we didn't do before, and that is decreasing the cost of electricity a lot. There are some parts, like Spain and Portugal, for example, they had free energy for big parts of the day, or even I believe it was the summer months last year, because they had an excess of solar. And it was my a good friend Anne Curry who said, and isn't that just a dream of humanity, clean, abundant energy for all? Like that's what we wanted for a long time. And we are not there yet, but we're definitely heading in that trajectory. Now, the thing about renewables is they depend on something that's variable, like wind or sun, or if it has been raining the past few months so that we have enough water for hydro, etc. So they are more spiky than the always-on fossil fuels. And that will take a little adapting to. So systems that can do this shifting based on when there is energy available, in the future they will have cheaper power, but they will also be more resilient to the future. It doesn't matter if you believe in climate change or not. The fact is, our grid is being revolutionized. That's just a fact of life.
It's all very, very cool.
Yeah, I think it is fascinating, and it's easy to like geek out about it. But maybe also important to remember that it doesn't have to be so hard. It can be easy things like deleting your unused resources, thinking about right sizing the instances that you use, think about auto scaling.
Is it all of my photos in the cloud? Should I be cleaning up more of my photos?
That's the thing also a lot of people ask. I think we have to be pragmatic. Like, your photos likely have a meaning to you. They're sentimental and you want to keep them around. So don't start with that. Start with the unuseful things. Start with your zombie workloads, the test VM you set up 2 years ago and never used. That one, you don't need to delete that one first. Mm-hmm. Your photos of your friends and family, I think you should keep them.
Okay. I'll keep the photos.
Yes.
That's fine. And also, I think you said I don't need to waste a lot of effort deleting all my unread emails.
Yeah, that's another hot potato where people, I mean, and that's the thing also, if you're never going to read them again, yeah, why keep them around? But for some emails, at least for me, I have I have a clean inbox policy. I'm very strict about my mail. Not only because I work in M365 products, so we use a lot of email, but that's just how I run my life. So I have some folders that are very important then, but I actually search a lot for like historical context as well, and that are useful to me. Those I would not want to delete. But other things that are just a notification that my PR bill was green, I will never look at that again. So maybe I turn off that email function, or I simply delete the email.
Well, did you tell them what Green Software Foundation is?
Oh, I don't think I did, but yeah, the Green Software Foundation, Microsoft is actually a founding and steering member. So I think just like this week or last week, early June, late May, we celebrated 3 years, which is really cool. But it's a non-profit foundation under the Linux Foundation. And it started with, I believe it was just 4 organizations at the start. And now there's so many. It's like over 30 or over 40 maybe now. It's a lot of different organizations who are contributing, which I think is really cool. And their whole mission is to build a trusted ecosystem around green software. So best practices, tooling, standards, things like that. So they have a bunch of different projects. They also have local meetup groups in a lot of different countries now. There is one in Oslo. I'm not sure if you have one in Australia. Maybe worth checking out.
Maybe we're starting.
Maybe we're starting. Yeah, that would be really cool. I think there is one in London as well. But yeah, different places in the globe. And because there are so many organizations in it, it really spans the globe and it spans the industry. There are everything from big for-profit corporations to small non-profits to educational instances. And for me, that's been so important when I've contributed to that work. We're trying to do something that represents the entire industry, something that we agree on, something that we think will be better. Because when you put more heads into something, it just gets better. You know, like more, like who would have thought? A more diverse perspective yields a better end result.
So that's one of your tips, that people should check that out and see what ways they could get involved.
Yeah, they can get involved. So it's a little tricky because you have to be a part of a member organization to actively contribute, but everything is open. So you can go onto GitHub, you can see what's on there, you can write your own issues, you can participate in the discussion. You just cannot be part of the decision process because that's governing the specific.
They have to lobby their organization to join it.
Yes, exactly. And there's a big join us button right on the front page, so it should be easy to find. But yeah, some of my favorite projects there is the Green Software Maturity Matrix. It's a maturity matrix to explain how a tech organization can handle this energy transition that we talked about, and concrete risk mitigation strategies, which I think is really good. The software and carbon intensity specification has a very special place in my heart because I was very involved during the first 1-2 years of its creation. It's now actually an ISO standard for getting the carbon score of your software. So yeah, it's near and dear to my heart. There's a podcast as well, you can listen to me occasionally being on there as well. Or if you had enough of me, there are other people who are on more regularly.
Okay, so we're going to add all of the resources that Sara has mentioned and any other ones that she can think of to the log for this episode. So you'll be able to look those up and see how you can get involved. Is there any top tips you want to finish with to send them on their way?
Yeah, I think the thing to remember here is that green software is more efficient software. Green software is often cheaper, more resilient, and more performant. And start with the low-hanging fruits. Don't do the big projects first. Start with the easy things, the things that will yield the most bang for a buck. And then, kind of like performance, do 1% over time, and that's how you build a culture around it.
That's perfect. Sara and I are going to hang around for another 10-15 minutes to answer your questions in chat. So if you have anything, do type those in and we will do our best to get to them. Thanks for joining us today, Sara. That was really a lot of fun and very, very useful information.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, everyone, and we will see you all next time on New Breakpoint.
We hope you enjoyed this digital event. We have specialists on standby to answer your questions for a short while. To ask a question, type it into the chat window now and we'll get to it as quickly as we can. You'll also find a resources widget in the bottom middle of your screen. We've put additional links in there to learn more about what we've covered today. Lastly, tell us how you found this experience through the survey widget. If you're not staying for the Q&A, thank you for attending and we hope to see you again soon.